kindly come and deliver her speech on the concept of justice. Salawat.
Thank you very much for inviting me to share in your meetings tonight. It's very special. I know when I went home last year, I went home on a real high because we'd shared together and I had learnt so much and enjoyed your hospitality and sharing together. So thank you for that and thank you for inviting me tonight. Kamal asked me to speak on justice as a spiritual principle. And you know when you agree to these things, you think, yeah, I'll do that. And then begin to think, whoops. Justice as a spiritual principle. You might know that in the Chelmsford Diocese, at the moment, we are all working towards what's called the Transforming Presence Initiative, where we, as people of faith, are seeking to be a transforming presence in our communities. And we are called to live distinctively and to make a difference. And part of that is surely to be just in our dealings and to promote justice among our friends, our communities, and in the wider world. And I think justice is a spiritual principle because it is what God requires of us. Prophet Isaiah says, "Thus says God, maintain justice and do what is right." And the prophet Micah says, "He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." To do justice, to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. And isn't that what we've already heard about tonight? Kindness and humankind. As I was reading the translation of the prayers, came up again about kindness. And justice is so much a concern for all of us, isn't it? Justice with a concern for fair treatment for all, for equality for all, for peace. And surely that grows out of my relationship with God, who is so great that he made the world and who yet cares about each one of us. Our awesome God. In the Psalms we read, "Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. Yet you have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honour." Wow, God is great. And it is surely when I don't give God his rightful place that things begin to go wrong. When I don't walk humbly with God, when I think I know better than God, that things start to go awry and I begin to act unjustly and fail to show kindness to my brothers and sisters. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus said, He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. Words which spoke of Jesus' desire for justice as a mark of God's kingdom. And again, in his famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus proclaimed, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. See, Jesus was prepared to turn the values of his day upside down. He was prepared to upset polite society in order to reach everyone with God's love. He was prepared to teach women. He was prepared to be in a house with women who weren't his relations. He was prepared to be with those on the edge of society. He was prepared to be with those who nobody else would talk to. He was prepared to do all that, not for his own glory, but for God's glory. And today we surely live in a society where success, whatever that might mean, and power count for everything. Jesus was prepared to give away his power for the sake of the world. And if justice is important for us, and we seek to live as genuine human beings, reflecting the love, kindness and justice of God, perhaps we too might need to be prepared to put aside what the world counts as success and seek God's will by walking humbly with him and by seeking to show kindness to our brothers and sisters. As many people have said in many of the great religions of the world, do to others as you would have them do to you. The golden rule. Sadly, we hear so much about injustice and unfairness, don't we? Recently in the news, just this last week, yet again, we've heard about older people being mistreated or neglected within our public and private services. People not being shown basic human kindness or being treated with dignity. What an injustice. An injustice which surely needs to be turned around by showing kindness instead of control. And I guess each one of us can think of unjust situations which we encounter in our daily lives and in the wider world. And each one of us sharing together has a role to play in striving for a more just world. Each one of us is called to make a difference where we are, whatever we are, whatever we do. We're surely called to do justice by showing kindness and by walking humbly with God. Kindness, as we've already heard, is a characteristic which is called for in most of the world's great religions, in Islam, in Buddhism, in Christianity. And there are many examples of how kindness has enabled people to work together and create a more just world. The theologian Tom Wright has suggested that the challenge we face today is to grow and develop a fresh generation of leaders in all walks of life, whose character has been formed in wisdom and public service, and not in greed for money or power. One of my heroes is Dag Hammarskjöld. He was Secretary General of the United Nations. He was sadly killed in a plane crash. He said this: "Your position never gives you the right to command. It only imposes on you the duty of so living your life that others can receive your orders without being humiliated." That is surely treating people kindly. We've already talked about animals, so that gives me the entree to talk about Francis of Assisi, one of the people I really like, and you're lucky because tonight I haven't brought a puppet, but Francis of Assisi lived in the 12th century, and he was the son of a very rich family. And one day he saw a beggar. Now, he could have just given the beggar some money, but he didn't. He sat down beside him and they exchanged their clothes. So that the beggar had the rich and the better clothes than Francis did. And then Francis himself begged from then on. He gave away all he had because he saw of the injustices in the world. And he sought to change that through his kindness. And it was his kindness to people, but as we know also, his kindness to animals, because he saw the importance of all the created order and God's love for the whole created order. So I'm going to end with the prayer of St. Francis, which unfortunately was taken over by some of the Tory party at one stage, wasn't it, when they came into power? But I'm still going to end with it, the full version. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, harmony. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sorrow, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we're born to eternal life. Thank you again for inviting me to share with you tonight. And the words which I'm taking with me and which during our next Advent and Lent season I will be reflecting again on those words. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend, for those insightful words. The commander of the faithful, Imam Ali alayhi salam, had many strong characteristics, but his justice made him such an icon that his name is quoted as one of the finest jurists of all time. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, "Justice is putting the things in their proper place." I will invite renowned scholar Sayyid Ali Abbas Rizvi to come and enlighten us with a speech on the concept of justice. Salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for having invited me today to be with you. It's a great pleasure to see the people of Chelmsford coming together like this. And I think it's important that we continue this culture of interfaith, because I do feel that the way forward will be us breaking those cultural barriers that we've built over the last 100 years or so. I know there's a push at the moment within Europe as well, and I remember last year meeting, I think at the time, the Bishop of Chelmsford at the EU Parliament, and we had a bit of a conversation as well, because both of us were from roughly the same place around South England, so we discussed the reality and the fact that we need to break those barriers down. The problem isn't with religion. The actual problem today is with culture and the diversity of culture. The fact that misconception has been created, and the fact that we need to break that down to understand each other's cultures. And I believe that as time goes on, and as our children grow up, I feel that living in this culture, you find that you become one with that. Go back 1,000 years and you'll see that religion did live harmoniously, and it was a place in the Middle East that today is full of violence and fighting. But nevertheless, if you do go back 1,000 years ago, you do find three major religions of the world who live together: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so I remember looking a couple of years ago into a book, and it was by a Christian author, and he himself was a priest of the Orthodox Church. And he writes an entire book on the basis of human justice, the voice of human justice. And so when asked, I said, well look, you've written an entire book on a Muslim character, why have you done this? And that character was Imam Ali, as stated by the young gentleman. These 10 nights, in fact, are a remembrance of Imam Ali and what he stood for. So it's been about a decade or so now that the United Nations promoted Imam Ali as the voice of justice. And from then onwards, you find that many academic pieces have been written on him. The idea of justice, the idea of virtue. The fact of the matter is that he's vast, and he encompasses many different areas of human society. But the one that the Western world has focused on in the last 10 years has been the concept of justice. George Yordak was the name of this priest, and he writes that two very famous things. So when somebody asked him, they said, well, what is it about Ali that makes you or inspires you to write? He says, well, I remember as a child that on top of our door we had a saying that there is no youth but Ali and no sword like Zulfiqar. He said that what's the inspiration from a sword and a youth? He says, well, that sword is very famous amongst the Arabs for having two prongs. And that in itself represents good and evil on the one hand, at the same time the physical and the metaphysical world on the other hand, the relationship between the material world and the spiritual world. But more so that represents this idea of truth and justice. The idea that it's a divide of justice in the same way that today we find that there is a balance and a scale. Those two points of the sword represents that very justice, that very balance. The idea that on the Day of Judgment there will be a balance in place. So he says that that's what inspired me. And then from our culture as well, that Imam Ali is very famous within our culture. He says that throughout history, and he says that, look, we're the original Christians, having lived here within this region,